I'm Katie Posey, reading from Chico, California, and this is chapter 41 of Jane of Lantern Hill by Lucy Maud Montgomery. The letters came on the afternoon of the last of March. Jane was not at St. Agatha's. She had had a touch of sore throat the day before, and Mother thought it was wiser for her to stay home. But her throat was better now, and Jane was reasonably happy. It was almost April, if not quite spring yet, at least the hope of spring. Just a little over 2 months, and she would keep her tryst with June at Lantern Hill. Meanwhile, she was planning some additions to her garden. For one thing, a row of nightly hollyhocks along the dike at the bottom. She would plant the seeds in August, and they would bloom the next summer. Grandmother and Aunt Gertrude and Mother had all gone to Mrs. Morrison's bridge and tea, so Mary brought the afternoon mail to Jane, who pounced joyfully on 3 letters for herself. One from Polly, one from Shingle, one Jane recognized Aunt Irene's copperplate writing. She read Polly's first, a good letter, full of fun and Lantern Hill jokes. There was one bit of news about Dad in it. He was planning a trip to the States very soon. Boston or New York or somewhere. Polly seemed rather vague, and Polly wound up with a paragraph that gave Jane a good laugh, her last laughter for some time. The last laughter of her childhood, it always seemed to Jane, looking back on it from later years. Mr. Julius Evans was awful mad last week, wrote Polly. A rat got drowned in his cask of new maple syrup, and he made a terrible fuss over such a waste. But Dad says he isn't sure it was wasted, so we are getting our syrup from Joe Baldwin's to be on the safe side. Jane was still laughing over this when she opened Shingle's letter. A paragraph on the second page leapt to her eye. Everybody is saying your dad is going to get a Yankee divorce and marry Lillian Morrow. Will she be your mother then? How do you like the idea? I guess she'll be your stepmother. Only that sounds so funny when your own mother is still alive. Will your name be changed? Caraway says not, but they do such queer things in the States. Anyway, I hope it won't make any difference about you coming to Lantern Hill in the summer. Jane felt literally sick and cold with agony as she dropped the letter and snatched up Aunt Irene's. She had been wondering what Aunt Irene could be writing to her about. She knew now. The letter told Jane that Aunt Irene suspected that her brother Andrew intended going to the States and living there long enough to get a U.S. divorce. Of course, it may not be true, Lovey. He hasn't told me. But it is all over the country, and where there is so much smoke, there must be some fire. And I think you ought to be prepared, Lovey. I know that several of his friends advised him long ago to get a divorce. But as he never discussed it with me, I have given no advice for or against. For some reason, I am at a loss to understand. He has shut me out of his confidence these past 2 years. But I have felt that the state of his affairs has long been very unsatisfactory. I'm sure you won't worry over this. I wouldn't have told you if I thought it would worry you. You have too much good sense. I've often remarked how old you were for your years. But of course, if it is true, it may make some difference to you. He might marry again. If you've seen a candle flame blown out, you will know what Jane looked like as she went blindly to the window. It was a dark day with occasional showers of driving rain. Jane looked at the cruel, repellent, merciless street, but did not see it. She had never felt such dreadful shame, such dreadful misery. Yet it seemed to her she ought to have known what was coming. There had been a hint or two last summer. She remembered Lillian Morrow's caressing Drew and Dad's pleasure in her company. And now, if this hideous thing were true, she would never spend a summer at Lantern Hill again. Would they dare to live at Lantern Hill? Lillian Morrow, her mother? Nonsense. Nobody could be her mother except Mother. The thing was unthinkable. But Lillian Morrow would be Father's wife. This had all been going on in these past weeks when she had been so happy, looking forward to June. I don't suppose I'll ever feel glad again, thought Jane drearily. Everything was suddenly meaningless. She felt as if she were far removed from everything. as if she were looking at life and people and things through the big end of Timothy Salt's telescope. It seemed years since she'd laughed over Polly's tale of Mr. Evans' wasted or unwasted maple syrup. Jane walked the floor of her room all the rest of that afternoon. She dared not sit down for a moment. It seemed that as long as she kept moving, her pain marched with her and she could bear it. If she were to stop, it would crush her. But by dinner time, Jane's mind had begun to function again. She must know the truth, and she knew what she must do to learn it, and it must be done at once. She counted the money she had left from Father's gift. Yes, there was just enough for a one-way ticket to the island. Nothing left over for meals or a Pullman, but that did not matter. Jane knew she would neither eat nor sleep until she knew. She went down to her dinner, which Mary had spread for her in the breakfast room, and tried to eat something lest Mary should notice. Mary did. "Your throat worse, Miss Victoria?" "No, my throat is all right," said Jane. Her voice sounded strange in her ears, as if it belonged to someone else. "Do you know what time Mother and Grandmother will be home, Mary?" "Not till late, Miss Victoria. You know your grandmother and Aunt Gertrude are going to dinner at your Uncle William's, meeting some of your grandmother's old friends from the West. And your mother is going to a party. She won't be home till after midnight, but Frank goes for the old lady at 11. The International Limited left at 10. Jane had all the time she needed. She went upstairs and packed a small hand grip with some necessities and a box of ginger snaps that were on her bedroom table. The darkness outside the window seemed to look in at her menacingly. The rain spat against the panes. The wind was very lonely in the leafless elms. Once Jane had thought the rain and the wind were friends of hers, but they seemed enemies now. Everything hurt her. Everything in her life seemed uprooted and withered. She put on her hat and coat, picked up her bag, went to Mother's room and pinned a little note on a pillow and crept down the stairs. Mary and Frank were having their dinner in the kitchen and the door was shut. Very quietly, Jane telephoned for a taxi. When it came, she was waiting outside for it. She went down the steps of 60 Gay and out of the grim iron gates for the last time. "The Union Station," she told the taxi driver. They moved swiftly away over the wet street that looked like a black river with drowned lights in it. Jane was going to ask for the truth from the only one who could tell it to her, her father.